Hey, how's it going? Zach from Widetrack. I've always found in situations like this, it's very helpful to remain enigmatic in your life. You know, you don't want people to know every little detail, but you still want to get the benefits of being vulnerable. I do feel kind of guilty about this though, so I decided I would share a couple things, I guess from my point of view, if it makes any difference. The bands Widetrack and The Vintage are a very large part of what I do and what I spend most of my time on. Being a child, I don't really have much to do in terms of obligations just yet. I mean, now that it's summer vacation, I find that many people that I know are actually struggling to find ways to fill out their days. I've taken to these two bands, Widetrack and The Vintage, as a way to put forth the growing creative energy that I have and utilize my time to a way that'll benefit me. Both of these bands were started roughly around the same time, 2005, 6, 7, I can't exactly remember, very shortly after I was born, but the reason they were started was largely due to the fact that my grandfather had passed away. I should mention that my dad was the founding member of both of these bands, and his main goal was to finally be in control of his musical objectives, I suppose, for lack of a better term. There's of course more to that, but this was a large part of what had been missing from previous bands. The first two Widetrack albums were made and released when I was too young to really understand or care or even possibly contribute to them. 2007 and 2009, when I was 3 and 5. This latest album, Widetrack 3, has been released 2018, I suppose, and has been in the making for a very long time. In the time that it was in the making, I joined the band, I learned the parts, I grew as a musician immensely, and I was able to record my bass parts and put them on the entire album, which is a very heavy feeling, I suppose, to know that you can do better, especially since it was so early in my musicianship that I've grown so much, as opposed to, 3 weeks ago. It feels like how most musicians would feel a year ago. Oh, I shouldn't have done that way, but I digress. What's done is done, and I am still very proud of it. Widetrack is my main focus, whether that's a good or a bad thing, because it is the most personal and expressive project that I am able to take part in. I value each of the things that I am able to do in Widetrack, whether it's make videos like this, record songs, talk to people, connect with people. It's all such a very genuine experience that I wouldn't trade it for anything. The Vintage is much like this, only it's the day job, quote unquote. I value the Vintage too, but it's in a total polar opposite way of the same musical compass, I suppose. The Vintage is a cover band that, as I mentioned before, was started around the same time as Widetrack. Sometimes during the Vintage, I see people that do cover gigs, and I see people in the band doing cover gigs, and I can understand how people would get burned out. I mean, imagine if you had a playlist that you would listen to every time you went out to do your job, and it consisted of 70s hits that you had heard growing up and that you would now been made to hear almost weekly now. It would get tiring. However, I've always found that it's a very wild change in perspective, considering to me songs like Stairway to Heaven and Bohemian Rhapsody don't seem old-fashioned or beat into the ground. They seem new as any song, I suppose. Coming into the Vintage with a fresh set of eyes, I'm able to really pinpoint what I think is the cause of most of this stuff, and it's very largely the fact that you have to change songs up and you can't get stuck in the mindset of, well, you have to do these songs or it won't be as good as if we did, or whatever other excuses. Joining the Vintage, it's allowed me to really get a grasp of the working musician's life and what is a large part of many musicians' life. I understand that few of you play instruments and are musicians, and even fewer of you go out and gig, but I can say that despite the songs, whether you like them or dislike them, whether they're old or fresh, there's always such a wonderful experience of being able to play live that I haven't gotten from anywhere else. Seeing people's faces light up, seeing people tell you that that night made them feel a whole lot better is all the most rewarding that any job like that could ever be, or any job could ever be, knowing that you impacted somebody's life. So that being said, to relate it all back, the Vintage and Widetrack are two halves, I suppose, of a full musical experience that I am so gifted to be able to take part of. Widetrack being the self-indulgence and the really personal connections with people that believe in the same bands and that believe in the same music that we do, which I guess could sound corny, but it's a large part of many of our lives. And the Vintage being able to just be a small part of somebody's night that makes a huge difference. Being able to really put energy forth on a stage, not worrying about if you make a little mistake here or there, because it's all just about the music. I suppose my main point about all this is I really want everyone in this group to know how happy it makes me to be in these two bands, and how going forward I will always put it's getting buggy out here, how I will always put my best foot forward for the sake of not only the music but all the people that support this music. Well, I suppose that about does it. If you have any inquiries about Widetrack, much of it can be found on the email list, which you might contact Ron Tippin for more information. The YouTube channel also holds many of our, I suppose, bits of knowledge and facts. Without further ado, keep on rocking.